Morning, everybody. This is the first of Saturday, the 28th of May, and today we are joined by Alice here. Would you like to introduce yourself, Alice, and give us a little
Yes,
bit of an intro?
yes, I will do. Yeah, hi. Shall I just start? Because the beginning of my talk kind of introduces myself. So is that all right? Do you need to say anything else, Amy?
No, you go ahead. I just wanted to know a little bit more about you and what you're going to be talking about today.
Yes, so I'm talking about co-creating an education and a bit about values and the values that underpin our home education. Yeah, and I'm mum to 4 boys. I've been unschooling myself alongside them for over 12 years now. So it's nice to be with you all.
Great. Well, I haven't got anyone else in the waiting room.
That's fine.
Just waiting to see if we get any latecomers, and then you can start.
Wonderful.
You're happy to go ahead?
Yeah, I will get cracking and people might be watching on catch up, which is lovely. Hello, those of you that are with me live. Nice to see you. Yeah, do pop any questions that you have in the chat, and I'm not going to talk for a full hour, so there will be time for questions at the end. So yeah, just feel free to do that. Yeah, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Alice. My boys are now aged 20, unbelievably, 19, 16 and 10. And my husband, Krish, who is a secondary maths teacher of over 20 years, and I took the older two out of primary school after just 4 terms when we saw the bright light of curiosity in our eldest son's eyes noticeably extinguish. But for me, in reality, the seeds of unschooling were sown in my own childhood because I struggled myself with anxiety throughout my life. I was selectively mute for the first 3 years that I was at primary school, and at times I was a school refuser. So I've always known in my heart that school is not the best place for all children to learn. I have a very strong play-based philosophy, which came really from my mum, who was a nursery school teacher her whole career. And so continuing to learn through play and hands-on exploration has been a really important part of our family's home education journey. We set out to craft an education, really, which began with our family's story, our children's interests, and all that we encountered living as a mixed race family in our local community. We set out on an adventure in organic education, and I have been writing on a page of that name right from the outset of our journey. So why organic education? Well, interestingly, I recently went on a visit to an organic farm, and the farmer asked us, what do you understand by the word organic? And the answers that people gave were generally framed around what wasn't being added to the soil and the crops and what chemicals were being avoided. And sometimes we can talk similarly about our education by what we are not doing. Perhaps we're avoiding school for whatever reason, we're avoiding standardized testing, we're maybe not even using curricula. But this farmer's response, this organic farmer's response was really interesting. He said, I like to think of it more in terms of what we are doing, how we are working with nature and what nature has given us rather than working against her. And I love that idea. I immediately thought of organic education and how we apply that to talking about education, because first and foremost, we are working with our children, with the child in front of us, their natural gifts and talents and interests, the person that we have been given, rather than working against them to fit them into a system which might not really suit them. So we begin with the child. And in moments of doubt and difficulty, when it might be tempting to grasp for resources or curricula, that's where we start, right? Come back again to that. Observe and center the child once more. But of course, there's another important player in this dynamic too, isn't there? And that's you, the home educating parent. The child is not isolated. She grows alongside you in family, in community. And so I wanted to talk this morning about co-creating an education, shaping a learning journey together as a family, in community, whatever that looks like for you in your locality. So I want to start by talking about values. Your values are what bring you to home education, and they form this foundation stone upon which you build and to which you can return when you doubt or when you struggle. What are the values underpinning your decision to home educate? How can you live in closer alignment to those values? Now, your values might not be the same as mine, and that's fine, but it's important to identify them for yourself and as a family. And a really key value for me is integrity. And I want to talk a little bit about this, not only for how that brought me to home educate, but because I read a really interesting paper recently by Parker Palmer, and this paper is called Divided No More. And he talks about integrity as the first stage in the unfolding of a movement. And this kind of really got my heart beating, because a movement is what we see, isn't it? A movement, a parent-led resistant movement born out of the realization that school isn't working and there have to be other ways of educating. Now, I disagree with the values around which schools are structured, with sorting according to the cans and the cannots, with the untruths that children are fed to motivate them through years of standardized curriculum, whilst their love of learning and their self-belief too often ebbs slowly away. They conclude they cannot learn without school, without a teacher, that they won't get anywhere in life without a handful of GCSEs, that there will be no job, no money, no happiness if they do not conform. And these things are not true. Far better to know oneself and one's gifts, to know who you are and what lights you up, and to learn in your formative adolescent years who you are and what you're passionate about. As unique individuals, we all have an inherent worth and value which is not earned or worked for. It's not dependent upon our achievements, our grades or qualifications. Education can be founded upon the personhood of each of us, our own passions, gifts, talents, quirks, struggles, and personalities. And this is worlds apart from the values that our school system is currently purporting. Now, this is where it gets interesting in terms of movements, right? Because if you are looking for political or organizational change, it can be very slow in coming. When I took my boys out of school 12 years ago, I hoped that the pendulum would swing back towards a more play and child-centered learning experience. And it hasn't, it's gone the other way. It can be frustrating, the pace of change, the slowness of it, when we find ourselves in opposition to it and we feel marginalized and misunderstood. We can feel hopeless, actually, but being part of a movement, that's energizing. And Parker Palmer, in that paper I mentioned, draws parallels with the civil rights and the women's liberation movements, growing and finding strength and encouragement outside of organizational structures, in time returning to challenge those systems. And he suggests that movements begin with individuals who choose integrity, who choose to stop living divided lives. That's the name of the paper, Divided No More. Divided lives, that is the feeling that our inner values and our outward being in the world are misaligned, are out of sync. And in my experience, this tension, this division, this kind of cognitive dissonance leads me to anxiety. And I get ill actually with anxiety because I'm living out of alignment. And when this tension becomes unbearable, Palmer suggests that something snaps. And for the sake of personal integrity and wholeness, we have to make a choice. We have to make a change. And so the decision to change direction, to do something different, is therefore deeply personal. And Parker Palmer calls this the Rosa Parks decision, in honor of the woman who decided one hot Alabama day in 1955 that she would sit down at the front of the bus, occupying space in which she had been told she had no place. And Rosa Parks' decision was rooted in her community and in a shared experience of oppression. And yet her decision that day was deeply personal. Reflecting years later, she said simply, "I sat down because my feet were tired." And I'm just going to try and share my screen because Parker Palmer describes this really beautifully. Is that showing up? It's not the right slide. It's that one I want. Can you see that?
We can see that
but
it's fine,
not gone
Alice.
into full screen yet.
If you put it onto slideshow, it probably will go.
Yeah, it should.
Yeah, there you go.
Is it full screen? Yeah.
Do that.
Parker Palmer describes this experience. He says Rosa Parks sat at the front of the bus because her soul was tired of the vast demoralizing gap between knowing herself as fully human and collaborating with a system that denied her humanity. The decision to stop leading a divided life is less a strategy for altering other people's values than an uprising of the elemental need for one's own values to come to the fore. I'll just stop that for a minute, but I will put it back on in a moment. When we live this sense of our own values, when we live with integrity, we make that choice, we change. It changes us, and we meet others on a similar journey. We find encouragement, we find new community, we begin to see the world differently, we live differently. And by living differently, we show that alternative narratives are possible, that there is more than one road, more than one story. And the energy, the inspiration, the resistance passes from one person to another. People see it, they're challenged, inspired, and a movement is born, and it grows, and it becomes a force to be reckoned with. And I see this in the home education movement. We've seen this over the years. More and more parents acting in resistance, some by choice, some because they have no other choice. But we're all motivated by our dissatisfaction with a system that we see denying our humanity, denying our children's humanity. And we want to find a better way. We know there has to be a better way. There has to be a more holistic way. And our individual stories are part of a movement, a resistance movement, which challenges the powers that be. It challenges that single narrative that children must be in school. It's speaking truth to power. As Peter Gray said yesterday, we need to be bolder, freer, louder. We know that school is not the best learning environment for all children. And home education can look different for everyone. That's its beauty, but it's also its challenge. We can recognise, demonstrate, and celebrate diversity. This is not a one size fits all. It is a liberation journey, and it starts with you, with your child, your family, and the values by which you desire to live your lives. Now, some of you might be familiar with this analogy. Some of you might have heard me share it before, and I like to share it as I think it's quite helpful in thinking about your vision for your home ed journey and the values that underpin it. But it's also a really good way of looking at your time, at your weeks and your days, and what is most important to you. What are your key values, the principles underpinning your home education, your approach? And what are the uncompromisable things that you want to include in your week, in your day? Oh, I'm just going to try and put my screen up again. I don't like to just leave it up.
That's lovely.
Is that there?
Yeah.
Okay, oh, here we are. Values. What values underpin our education? So yeah, you might have seen this. So these key values, or these key things that you want to be a part of your education, are your rocks, right? A key value might be respect, or kindness, individuality, faith, laughter, sustainability, right? Important things in your week might be time outside, time with grandparents, reading aloud together, meditation, cooking and eating together, getting your hands in the earth. They'll be different, they'll be unique for you and your family. But these important values, these important things are your rocks. Put your rocks in place first, get them in there as a matter of priority. If you don't do that, then the pebbles and the sand will soon fill the jar, leaving you feeling disorientated and overwhelmed. If the rocks aren't in place, it can be hard to fit them in. Pebbles are perhaps the things you need to get done, the pressing and the urgent things, or perhaps lesser values, maybe around teamwork, chores, or more formal looking schoolwork. And these will not be the same for everyone, but sit down with your family and discuss these matters. How do your children's jars look? Where are you aligned? Where do you need to compromise? And revisit this conversation from time to time. It's a really simple visual and a good way to come back and remind yourself of what your priorities are. The sand is the trivia, the things that are less important, the things that can waste our time. Sand can very easily fill the jar, fill our lives, our weeks, our days, and leave us floundering, wondering why we're not getting done the things we want to get done. So get the rocks in the jar, and then the sand can filter into the gaps, and then it won't bother you. I often share this analogy in respect to questions about screen time as well, both ours and our children's. But I want to talk a little bit this morning about co-creation and about what that means, about how we go about co-creating an education, rooting our children in those values, right? And in place in our story, connecting them to the past and the future. And it's important to understand from the outset that co-creation is a countercultural action, hence the talk about movements. I love the work of feminist writer Bell Hooks, and her work draws attention to the dominant narratives. Let's face it, she writes, most of us were taught in classrooms where styles of teaching reflected the notion of a single norm of thought and experience, which we were encouraged to believe was universal. Bell Hooks, of course, was shaped by the work of Paulo Freire, whose challenge to the progressive educator in offering her or his reading of the world is to bring out the fact that there are other readings of the world, different from the one being offered as the educator's own, and at times antagonistic to it. And sometimes that antagonism, that wrestling of truths, happens inside our very selves as we grow and learn from others, and as our vision enlarges. We are all evolving works in progress, and sharing our own learning journey can be important to our children's development. We don't need to have it all together. They can watch us struggle and work through problems, and they learn that that is part of the human experience. So co-creation welcomes all our voices. It beckons us from the shadows and it calls us to play our part, to share our dreams and to shape the collective narratives so that all might be enriched. Co-creation changes the balance of power by welcoming everyone to the circle and recognizing that we all have things to teach and things to learn. We welcome our shared humanity, our humble frailty, and our unfathomable strength in creative collaboration. We're recognizing that we all bring multiple narratives within ourselves, all the strands and parts that make us up. And we shape this rich tapestry, which will challenge all our preconceptions of power and of hope and of the future. Co-creation challenges the institutions and the power dynamics that we have accepted, the stereotypes we have inherited, and the reality that we have been given. It's a rewriting of the scripts, and therefore it is liberating. It therefore feels to me immensely hopeful. It's an engaged pedagogy which connects learning and life experience, emphasizes well-being, and values student expression. Bell Hooks says, the future of learning lies with the cultivation of conversations, of dialogue. And this is one of the strengths of home education. I've said this before, quality conversation enjoyed in relationship. Education as a practice of freedom differs from traditional schooling in the understanding that we have much to learn from our children, each one from the other. And these are what I refer to as the spaces between us, spaces of possibility when two meet with mutual respect and openness to learning. Those spaces are where magic happens. Over 12 years ago, I saw the light go out in my son's eyes. He stopped asking questions. He stopped driving his own learning. And he was only 7. I could see his agency diminishing. With hindsight, I understand that that boy learns by asking questions. He learns through discussion. Yet in a busy class of 30, of course he was told, sit down, be quiet, essentially shutting down his primary means of learning. So he did shut up. He stopped asking questions. He lost his curiosity and his spark. And I dreamed of a more inspiring education for him and his brothers, an education which began with their being situated in our family and community, and which pursued the questions that they were asking. And it felt then like a radical act of rebellion to deregister our boys from the schooling system and set out on a journey to co-create an educational experience which welcomed our whole selves in a collaborative and hopeful march of liberation. The traditional adult-child power dynamic in our home shifted, and it shifted in our hearts. My children became my teachers, and when I was unsure of my footing, they showed me the way as we pursued our interests and learning adventures through a world that buzzed with possibilities. And this was not always an easy surrender. Sometimes we fought, particularly me and my eldest. He fought me out of his way, and slowly I learned to trust them, to get out of the way with my expectations and my agendas, which came from my own experience of schooling. This adventure changed me. It changed the way I perceive human learning, the way I see institutions. It helped me reconnect with myself, with that deep inner knowing that I had lost long ago, my intuition. Our family's journey felt like recreation of a new way of living and learning, and reconnection with the old ways that once were, bridging the past and the future, the transgenerational conveyance of values rooted in place and the histories within us. Bell Hooks suggests that learning in this way promises the full participation of all involved in mutual relationships which nurture mutual growth, creating an atmosphere of trust and commitment which allows for genuine learning. It expands our hearts and minds, making us better learners as we embrace and explore the practice of knowing together, seeing intelligence as a resource which strengthens our common good. My children taught me that life presents endless opportunities for learning, that we never stop learning, and that learning to learn and believing in our own ability to attain the heights of our own ambition without waiting for permission is indeed truly liberating. If we believe this, if we can relax and trust this process, our children grow to drive their own learning journeys in the most surprising ways and continue to challenge and inspire us as they grow into adulthood. Against our current political backdrop, such alternative learning pathways are countercultural and rebellious. They speak to me of stubborn and necessary hope in a humanity that we have forgotten lies dormant or unheeded inside all of us. They are an awakening on multiple levels. And this to me is co-creation. It's the liberating work of bringing our curious, creative, complicated selves into dynamic, diverse community, shaping the future we dream into being together. Now I'm going to ground all of that, all that I've said, before we go into questions by sharing with you some examples of my own learning adventures with my 4 boys, who are all so different, to show you how we can start with the child before us with their unique interests and challenges, and yet remembering too what we parents bring to the mix. So I'm just going to show you some pictures. I probably had enough of looking at me. Let's just find the screen share again. See that?
Yep, we can see that.
Wonderful, thank you. So this is my eldest, now 20, as I said. He's our young engineer. He always had a passion for building and constructing things and figuring out how things worked. He was always a very strong self-directed learner. Lego play moved to Technic, to real cars, which he pulled apart on our front drive, seeking out like-minded mentors in the community and on YouTube. When he opted into school at age 14, it was his project-based learning which secured him a place on the F1 in Schools team as their design engineer. And it was this extracurricular project work facilitated by a voluntary engineering mentor, which kept him in school really, because it wasn't easy. And it gave him the connections and the portfolio, which led to an apprenticeship opportunity at the cutting edge of engineering research and development. And it thrills me to see him doing what he loves. It doesn't feel like work when you're playing every day. And this is my second son. He's a completely different character, a laid back creative with a passion for DJing, music production and playing guitar. He always enjoyed more creative pursuits, cooking, gardening, nature, drawing, technology. His journey in recent years hasn't been easy as he's moved towards adulthood, figuring out what he wants to do. And this transition period can be anxiety inducing for parents, because once again, we have to kick out all those shoulds. He should be in college, he should be getting a job. It's been challenging to me to manage my own anxieties so as not to exacerbate his. but we learn to trust. We learn to trust our children to find their way and keep encouraging them to dream and to follow their interests. He's growing in independence, this boy, having recently passed his driving test, and he's now in an apprenticeship as an events technician, pursuing his DJing and his music production around that. And this is my third son. He's an athlete with a passion for tennis and an interest in sports psychology. And he's currently completing his GCSEs from home. He's highly self-motivated and a great inspiration to me in terms of self-discipline and habits, which help him to manage anxiety and look after his mental health. He loves having the time to pursue his sports around his studies, and he's already coaching at his tennis club, which is what he currently hopes to do for a living. He's looking at going to college next year, and it's been lovely to be able to continue facilitating and supporting his learning journey through these exam years with less anxiety, with greater balance, and with the learner firmly in the driving seat. And here's my small one, who's not so small anymore, having recently turned 10. He is currently fascinated by reptiles and Mexico. So we have adopted a leopard gecko, who is an endless source of fascination. And we are enjoying learning about and cooking lots of Mexican food. And just last week, he decided, well, it was the culmination of a kayaking course that he had decided to take. And this caused him considerable anxiety. But I was so proud of the way he persevered and pushed through, completing the block of lessons to join a 4-kilometer river paddle. And facilitating learning in this way isn't always easy. It doesn't always mean the easy way, that our children won't do things that are difficult or things that are challenging. We can encourage our children to push beyond their comfort zones, supporting and enabling them to overcome challenges by laying out a feast of opportunities and talking with them about where we can see possibilities and potential growth areas. Speaking of which, it is important not to leave out ourselves. As parent learners, we too need to be stretching ourselves and pushing beyond our comfort zones to grow and develop. The best way to raise active, engaged learners is to be an active, engaged learner and to share our own learning and challenges with our children too. As a child who was selectively mute, speaking up is hard for me, but I'm doing so more and more because I believe that these multiple narratives are important, that living different stories and sharing our journeys matters, that systems as we know them might be challenged, that you might be encouraged and empowered to forge your own pathway with your child, to join this movement and to change the dialogue around education. 4 boys, I am seriously outnumbered, all so different, and none of them like me. None of those interests are my interests. To me, this is not just leaving your child to themselves, but paying close attention to where their attention is focused, exploring the questions that they pose, facilitating opportunities to explore this big, beautiful world, to find like-minded mentors and to grow in community, holding true to those value jars, pushing out of your own comfort zone, co-creating a learning journey. Where will yours take you?
Thank you so much, Alice. That's wonderful. I love the visual of the jars. That really touched me because I'm forever saying to my son, can you get your chores done first?
I think it's a really simple visual to take away. Yeah.
That's really helpful.
Yeah, I'm opening up to questions. Please put questions in the chat and perhaps Amy can help me manage those.
Yep.
If for people that are watching on catch up you can find me on Facebook at Organic Education, where I hope there's inspiration and encouragement for this kind of home education adventure, including a series of monthly lives that I did on various topics last year, and a link to my TEDx talk, which is on YouTube.
Megan's asked, are you also on Twitter?
I'm not on Twitter, Megan. I'm
Oh,
so
bless
sorry.
you.
I can't do Twitter. It's just too noisy. It's too much for me. So I'm kind of old fashioned.
Has anyone got any further questions they'd like to ask Alice? If you pop your hand up, we can get you up here. Or you can just, if you're a bit camera shy, you can just put something in the chat. Iona, lovely. Thank you for volunteering. There we go.
Hi.
Hello, Alice.
Hi.
Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you.
My children are 10 and 8. It's been an inspiration actually to follow your stories, because your children are slightly older, some of them. And to hear a mother who, unschooled mainly, sort of speak positively and speak confidence into me. Thank you, Matthew. One fear I have, and I have to fight it, but sometimes I think it's a grounded fear, is will our children be slothful, you know? And it's probably a fear I have about myself being slothful. Will I waste time? And sometimes I look at time and I think, well, actually, it looks like sloth from one perspective, but it's investment from another. And actually, time to just be and mull things over in your brain while you're doodling is precious. So knowing all that, yet I still sometimes think, oh, if we haven't done, I don't know, some proper spell work and some math work, we haven't done learning today, you know? What do I do? Do you get that?
I think we all have these struggles, Johanna. I think you've kind of answered your own question there, haven't you? Because I think we do live in a culture which very much makes us feel like we need to be doing all the time, like we need to be busy all the time. And I challenge that in myself quite often, also because I'm a personality who's always buzzing and busy. And my husband sometimes will literally think about nothing, and I don't know how he does it. I often say to him, how can you just empty your head and switch off? I'm always buzzing. And children are different, yeah. And so, you know, I think you're right that sometimes that time to sit and think is something so precious that children are not allowed. We've always got to be keeping them busy and entertaining them and making sure that they're purposeful. And yeah, I think it comes back to balance, doesn't it? And to those jars, right? And I think it's a really good conversation to have with your children, to give them some ownership as well over the way that they spend their time and how they're choosing to spend their time. And I think that having those conversations and allowing for that space, as they grow, they take ownership for the way that they are choosing to spend time. Just as we have to, right? And so, you know, in my experience, that does happen as they grow up into their older teens. And you know, my third son Noah, he's very interested in kind of the psychology of the mind and mindset and so on, but he's recently come off social media through his own decision, that it's just taking too much of his time. And so, you know, they have this kind of ownership, and I think that when that comes from within them, from within their own intrinsic understanding and motivations, then you know, that's what you want, isn't it? You don't want them to be doing because they're told, now do this, now do that. You want them themselves to be learning how to spend time wisely. And so I think that the conversations you have over time shape that, and create those intrinsically motivated learners that we want our children to become.
Thank you, Alice.
It's a good question. Thank you.
I've got Megan asking in the chat here, with a child who loves animals other than visiting zoos, how do you encourage them to learn more about the animals in a way that can prepare them for a job for a child aged 10? That's
a good question. My son, as I said, with the reptile interest, is very interested. We do watch lots of really good quality documentaries about the natural world. There are so many, aren't there, that are brilliant, that can give animals that are less accessible to us, give us access to animals that are that we can't necessarily see in real life, that spark that interest. And I'm amazed at what my son knows about reptiles. I mean, it is phenomenal. I love the removal of ceilings. So, when children are in school and they're being taught according to learning outcomes and a curriculum, there'll be certain things that the curriculum and the teacher want the child to learn. But when you remove that and they're just free to go as deep as they want and to probe their interest, just as far as they want to take it, the amount of knowledge and the depth of understanding that they can acquire is phenomenal. My son has particular YouTube channels that he knows are very good, with particular people who are fascinated about the things he's interested in, reptiles. We've been to reptile shops to learn all about keeping reptiles and the kinds of things that they need. And we've also we did a really good thing, which was a kind of working holiday at the coast, where it was reasonably cheap because we stayed in a sort of dorm kind of setup, and but we worked, and then we had our meals provided, but there was an ecologist as part of the team, and so we just loved working alongside him, and he would just share his knowledge with us and point things out that we just wouldn't have even spotted in the grass. And finding people who share that passion, perhaps through the local wildlife trust, and just getting out and getting familiar with local kind of flora and fauna as well, I think is really, really valuable. There's a live I did last year on my page with a young guy who's a wildlife photographer who grew up on a very remote island off Wales, sharing about how he grew in his understanding of and love for the natural world through an alternative childhood. So that's worth checking out as well. But maybe other people have ideas too that they can put in the chat. I can see people doing that. Thank you.
That's okay. Have you got any of the YouTube channels that you use, said Megan?
Oh my goodness.
For the animals. I've mentioned Wild Kratts and Steve Backshall because they're
Deadly
favourites.
60. My son really liked. That's not YouTube, that was on the telly, but Clint's Reptiles is one he absolutely loves. His is very specifically reptiles, so I don't know if anyone's got any more general animal ones they can put in the chat.
Wow. Yep, Megan's son likes reptiles too.
Okay.
My son
a lot of
said, "Oh my God, he's got a reptile. I want one. I want one." I went, "What? So you can kill that as well?"
It was interesting that the gecko, my son was very much researching geckos and the care of geckos, really wanted a gecko. And then my mum came across a lady, this is how things happen in organic education, in her pottery group, who had a very old gecko who she didn't really want anymore. Her children had grown up and he was looking for a new home. So she gave my son this older leopard gecko. He's 15 and apparently they live to be about 20, so we've got this older gecko, but she gave him all the setup, everything that he needed, which is quite he costed up how much it would cost to set up a gecko at home, and it was such a generous offer. But the thing is, as an organic educator, right, you can't then go, "Oh no, we're not having the gecko," can you? Because that's his real interest and passion. He's done all the research and then someone's giving us everything. It's like, yeah, okay, we'll take the gecko. He is very fascinating to watch, but I still don't like feeding him the live crickets.
Oh,
anyway,
I don't envy you at all. I'm very much like you actually, Alice. When I was listening to what you were saying about how you don't have the same interests as your children, and I've had exactly the same thing with my son. I'm very artistic, creative, academic, and so I kind of cover a lot of that in my mindset and my skill base. And it's really been like I'm a fish out of water because he wants to do like marine biology or
Yes.
or be in the RAF.
I think it's important to bring that out, because sometimes people will say to us, won't they, but how can you teach your child this? How do you know enough about this? As if that's a, you know, somehow discounts us from being able to facilitate our child's learning. And so I always think it's important to say that these are not my interests. You know, we facilitate our children's interests and enable them to grow into the people that they are. Yeah, so I think, yes, and it's amazing, isn't it? You learn so much about things that you've never really heard about before from them and from their kind of learning adventures. It's really
Teach how,
exciting.
not what, says Megan.
Sorry, say again.
Teach how, not what, said
Yes.
Megan.
Yes, that's right. And what we want
phrase.
is that our children learn to learn, right? And that they, because then when it comes to, for example, with my Noah, my third son, he's now tackling GCSE, and he's learned to learn, and he's learned about the things that work for him, the ways that he likes to learn.
Oh, sorry, that was from Paul. That's right. It's because
Hi,
you've both got a blue. You've both got a blue thing. So when it flashed up blue, I've said the wrong name. I'm so sorry.
Yes, we want them to finish that, to learn that they can learn, right, and that they can learn what they need to learn to get to the next thing that they want to do. So that's what we want, really, is for our children to learn to be lifelong learners.
Yeah, I love what you said. It really rung true with me. Thank you, Alice. Anyone else got anything they'd like to ask? Any burning questions? No? Well, thank you so much. Anya, do you want to say anything?
I don't have a burning question, but I always feel so encouraged after hearing you speak, Alice. It's just so, you make it sound so real but easy. Does that make sense? You don't make it sound like easy, but I don't know how to, I don't have words to explain things. Like real, as in you say it's not easy, but you make it sound like, yeah, man, I can do that. I can really do that. And you give us the tools to because some people say, oh, this you have to do this and this, but they don't tell you how. Well, as you say how you did it, and it's just really, really helpful.
Good, thank you, Anya. I hope that people feel empowered and encouraged, because you can do it. You can. If I can do it, you can do it. And there is a workshop I've given a few years at Learn Free, mentoring self-directed learners. I think some of you have been in that workshop. That is online now. So if you want some more kind of like practical guidance on this kind of approach to education, you can find that on certainly there's a link, I think, from my Organic Education Facebook page. Yeah, but thank you, Anya. That's encouraging to hear.
Thank you. Well, if nobody else has got any further questions, I'll let you get on with the rest of your day. And thank you so much, Alice.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining me. Really nice to see so many of you live. And if you're watching on the catch up, thank you for listening too. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks.